Well, that was easy. So, you've probably heard legends of the iPod Classic 6th and 7th generations being the hardest iPods to open. Some even call them the final boss of iPods. And I'm here to say that it's really not that bad. Seriously. What is important though is having the right tools and technique for the job. Let's start with the tools. To open up the iPod, all you really need is one of these prying tools. They're pretty cheap, and you can find them on eBay or Elite Obsolete store. If it's your first time, I would recommend at least getting 2 or more of these, but once you get used to it, you can easily get into the iPod with just one. I also recommend getting one of these prying picks for the battery. And you'll need a size 0 Phillips head screwdriver if you're going beyond just the back plate. But if you're just doing a flash mold or battery replacement, this is all you really need. Now, I've seen some people use razor blades or other sharp tools to get inside the iPod, and seriously, you should not be using these. Even if you're wearing gloves, you can easily slip and hurt yourself or other people, or accidentally cut up your desk or other equipment. And the same goes for more rigid tools like flathead screwdrivers. Even if you don't injure yourself, you can still damage the iPod in the process. With that out of the way, let's turn our attention to today's victim. The iPod's front plate is held to the back plate with 11 clips. 4 on the left side, 4 on the right side, 1 on the top, and 2 on the bottom. Now, I've marked them out on this iPod, but this is optional and you don't have to do it, especially if you don't feel comfortable taking a Sharpie to your iPod. And you don't really need to manually pry open all 11 clips to get inside. All you really need to do is free up one long edge and one short edge, and that should be enough. To begin, you'll need an entry point. I find it easier to start with one of the corners of the longer edges. For this one, I'll pick the top right corner. You'll want to insert the pry tool into the gap between the front and back plates, and then tilt it towards the front of the iPod before pushing it all the way in. At this point, the pry tool should be firmly in the gap between the front and back plates of the iPod. Most people will instinctively try and pry outwards to try and separate the front and the back plate. While this is the correct way to open older iPods, for this generation, I'm actually going to tell you to do the exact opposite. I'll explain why later, but for now, let's just focus on getting this iPod open. When you pry inwards, you might hear or feel a click as the clip inside is disengaged. If you have a second pry tool, now's the time to insert it next to the first and do the same with the adjacent clip. If you only have one pry tool, use your thumb to hold the iPod open and reinsert the pry tool next to the next clip. Again, pry inwards to disengage the clip and move along until all clips are disengaged. When you're working on one of the short sides of the iPods, pay close attention to where the clips are located, especially on the top edge. Make sure you only insert the pry tool where the clip is located, and you never go anywhere near the headphone jack or the hold switch, as you can easily damage those if you pry there. Once you've disengaged enough clips, the back plate will become loose enough to move. Now, don't pull it off just yet, because there are still 2 ribbon cables connecting the 2 halves of the iPod together, and if you move too quickly, you might accidentally rip the battery connector off the main board, which is what I did when I first opened one of these. To release the battery ribbon, first rotate the back plate slightly clockwise to expose the connector, which is here. Now, take the prying pick and lever it under the clip to pull it upwards. You'll need to do it on both the right and left sides, and eventually the clip will come upwards, which will free the battery ribbon. Here's a close-up shot with all the other parts removed, so you can see what's going on. With the battery ribbon freed, you can now open the iPod like a book. The hard drive is connected by a ribbon cable. If you want to swap the hard drive, you'll need to swing it downwards, then unfasten the clip with your fingernail or a tool. And now, you can remove the drive. If you're doing a drive or battery swap, this is as far as you need to go. Some guides might mention that you need to bend the backplate back into shape before reassembly. However, if you followed this guide correctly, this should not be necessary, as the backplate only really gets warped if you pry the wrong way. That being said, you might notice that the iPod doesn't go back together as cleanly as before. This is because the clips have been bent too far in during the opening process. To fix this, just take a pick or tweezer and slide under the clip and bend them back out. You don't need to bend them all the way out, just enough so that they can properly hook onto the rails on the front plate. Now, earlier I promised an explanation on why the prying direction is important and different to older generation iPods. On the iPod 1st to 4th generation, the clips are actually located on the front plate, and they hook onto rails on the back plate. So when you pry outwards, you're actually pushing the clips inwards, and that's how you release the back plate. The problem is, on the 5th gen and newer, the clips are now on the other side. You can see the clips are now on the back plate, and they hook onto rails on the front plate. And so if you use the same technique as before, and you try prying outwards like that, you're actually pushing the clips further and further into the front plate's rails, and that's why you end up damaging the back plate and making it much more harder to open. You might get away with this on the 5th gen because the front plate is plastic and it's more flexible, but you'll still end up damaging the iPod, whereas the inwards prying technique is much more safer. What if you're worried about scratching your iPod in the process? Well, for the front and back, you can always use masking tape to cover them. I kind of ran out, so I can't demonstrate that. But on the sides, I sometimes use electrical tape, and that's just to prevent the prying tool from scratching off the anodized layer. When prying the back plate, I cut through the tape, which actually stretches into the gap and protects the surface. Just make sure you use the stretchy kind of tape and not the inflexible kind. With that technique in mind, the most important thing is to practice again and again until you're comfortable. Check eBay or Marketplace for completely dead or scrap iPods and use them as practice dummies. Take your time, don't rush, and just follow along step by step. The more you do this, the more confident you become. The first time I tried this, it took me over 1 hour, but with practice, it now takes less than a minute. Practice really does make perfect here. So there you have it. I hope these instructions have helped make it easier to open the iPod Classic for you. Let me know how you get on in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.